My name doesn't matter much, but at the time this happened, I was 31 years old and working as a freelance graphic designer. I lived in Ohio and spent most of my time indoors, staring at a screen. That fall, I decided to take a short break and rent an isolated cabin for a week. I wanted quiet, no people,
No noise.
just rain, trees, and work. The cabin was advertised as peaceful and private. It was about 40 minutes from the nearest town, surrounded by thick forest. The owner told me people usually came there to disconnect. That was exactly what I wanted. I packed my laptop, groceries, and enough clothes for a few days. Nothing about the plan felt risky or unusual. I arrived in the late afternoon. The drive-in was long but calm. One narrow road. No traffic. The cabin appeared suddenly between trees, smaller than the photos, but still clean and solid. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and immediately noticed how quiet it was. Not silence exactly, just the sound of rain tapping lightly on the roof and leaves moving outside. I did a quick walkthrough. One bedroom, one bathroom, a small living area and kitchen. Everything looked normal. The windows were old but intact. The locks worked. There was a landline phone on the wall, and a note saying cell service was unreliable. That didn't bother me. I wasn't planning to call anyone. By early evening, the rain picked up. I cooked dinner, ate, and turned on the TV for background noise. It felt like a normal first night. Comfortable, even. I remember thinking the cabin felt more lived in than I expected, but I assumed it was just where from previous guests. Around 8 p.m., I heard a noise outside. It wasn't loud, just a brief sound, like something brushing against the wall. I paused the TV and listened. The rain was heavier now, so I told myself it was probably a branch or an animal. That made sense. I turned the TV back on. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time closer to the front of the cabin.
Slower.
More deliberate. I stood up and looked through the window, but the porch light was off and the rain made it hard to see anything beyond the glass. I didn't see movement. I didn't hear footsteps either. Just that same brushing sound, then nothing. I remember feeling slightly uncomfortable, but not scared. I locked the door anyway. That's when I noticed something small that didn't sit right with me. The mud near the front step looked disturbed, like someone had been standing there recently. The cabin sat in a low clearing, surrounded by tall pine trees that blocked most of the sky. From the front porch, all I could see was forest in every direction. The dirt road I had driven in on disappeared almost immediately behind the trees. Once night came, there were no visible lights anywhere. It felt cut off, but in a quiet, manageable way. It was late October, and the weather had already turned cold. The rain never fully stopped. It came in steady waves, tapping against the roof and dripping from the trees. The temperature dropped fast after sunset, and a thin fog settled between the trunks. Inside the cabin, the heater worked, but unevenly. Some rooms felt warm, others stayed cold. I was there because I needed distance. I had been dealing with deadlines and long hours for months. The cabin was supposed to give me time to finish a few projects without distractions.
No neighbors.
No traffic. No phone notifications. Just a few days of isolation so I could reset and focus. The owner had given me simple instructions. Lock the doors at night. Don't wander too far into the woods. Use the landline for emergencies. He mentioned wildlife, but didn't seem concerned. He said he checked the cabin between guests and hadn't had any problems. I was completely alone. No friends with me.
No pets.
The nearest person was the owner, who lived in town. I hadn't met him in person. We spoke briefly on the phone earlier that day, and he sounded tired but normal. Nothing about the conversation stood. After dinner, I cleaned up and set my laptop on the small kitchen table. I planned to work for a few hours, then sleep early. The cabin had poor lighting, so I turned on every lamp. The yellow light made the place feel smaller but also safer. Shadows still collected in the corners, but I ignored them. Every now and then, the wind pushed against the cabin, making the walls creak. The structure was old, and it responded to the weather. I reminded myself of that whenever a new sound came from outside. It was easy to explain everything away.
trees, wind, then
Animals. Before sitting down to work, I checked all the windows. They were closed and locked. The back of the cabin faced thicker woods, darker than the front. I pulled the curtains shut anyway. By 9 p.m., the rain was loud enough that it covered most distant noise. The cabin felt sealed off from the world. That was the point of the trip. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. At the time, nothing felt dangerous. It just felt quiet. I tried to focus on my work, but the quiet made it harder than I expected. Every sound inside the cabin felt louder because there was nothing else to compete with it. The ticking of the wall clock, the heater clicking on and off, the rain hitting the roof in uneven patterns. Around 9:30 p.m., I heard a noise from the back of the cabin. It sounded like something hitting the wall once. Not hard, just enough to get my attention. I stopped typing and listened. The rain kept falling, steady and heavy. I waited for the sound to repeat, but it didn't. A few minutes later, I heard it again, this time closer to the bedroom window. I stood up and walked slowly toward the back of the cabin. The floor creaked under my weight, louder than usual. I stopped near the window and leaned closer, careful not to touch the glass. I couldn't see much, just darkness and rain. The reflection of my own face stared back at me. That's when I noticed the curtain wasn't fully closed. I was sure I had pulled it all the way shut earlier. I fixed it and stepped back, feeling slightly embarrassed for even noticing something so small. Still, my heart rate didn't slow down right away. I returned to the table and forced myself to keep working. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. Then I heard footsteps. They were faint, almost blended into the sound of rain, but they had a rhythm the rain didn't. Slow steps, one after another. They stopped just as suddenly as they started. I didn't move. I counted in my head. 10 seconds.
20.
Nothing. I told myself it was an animal walking near the cabin. That explanation made sense. But the steps had sounded heavy, measured. A few minutes later, the porch creaked. That porch only made that sound when weight was put on it. I knew that because I had heard it when I arrived. This time, the creak came from the front of the cabin. Then another, like someone shifting their stance. I walked to the front window and lifted the curtain just enough to look out. The porch light was still off. I didn't want to turn it on. I don't know why. I just didn't. The porch was empty. No movement. No shape. Just rain dripping off the roof. When I stepped back, I noticed something else. The front door handle was wet. Not from rain. From touch. There were streaks on the metal, like fingers had wrapped around it recently. I stood there longer than I should have. My mind tried to catch up with what I was seeing. I checked the lock. It was still turned. I didn't feel panicked yet, just alert. But the feeling that settled in my chest didn't leave after that. It felt like I wasn't alone anymore. After I noticed the wet streaks on the door handle, I locked it again, even though it was already locked. I checked the deadbolt twice. The sound of it sliding into place felt louder than it should have. I turned off the TV so I could hear better. That made the cabin feel smaller. The rain was still falling, but now I could hear other sounds clearly. Something moved outside, close to the wall. Not brushing past anymore.
Pausing.
Like it was stopping to listen. I stayed near the door, watching the handle. My breathing felt too loud in my ears. I didn't want to turn on the porch light, but I also didn't want to stand there in the dark. After a few seconds, I flipped the switch. The light came on. Nothing was there. No person. No animal. Just the empty porch and rain. But the mud was disturbed again. Deeper this time. Fresh footprints. They led up to the steps and stopped. They didn't lead away. I stepped back slowly and turned the light off. My stomach tightened. I knew then that someone had been standing there moments earlier, close enough to touch the door. I grabbed my phone and checked for service again. Still nothing. I tried the landline just to be sure it worked. I picked it up and listened. There was a dial tone. That helped, but not much. Then I heard the sound of breathing. It came from the side of the cabin. Slow and controlled. Not panicked. Not rushed. I froze. The sound stayed steady, like whoever it belonged to wasn't worried about being heard. The breathing moved. It shifted toward the back of the cabin, toward the bedroom window. I followed it from inside, staying several feet away from the wall. I didn't want to make noise. When I reached the hallway, I saw a shadow move past the window. Just a shape.
Tall.
Human. The shadow paused. I heard a knock. Not loud. Just firm. One knock on the glass. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. My legs felt weak. The knock came again, slightly harder this time. Then a voice spoke, low and calm. Open the door. It wasn't a question. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt tight. The voice stayed quiet, like the man wasn't in a hurry, like he knew he had time. I heard footsteps move from the window back toward the front door. Each step felt closer, heavier. The floor inside the cabin creaked as I shifted my weight. The doorknob turned slowly. It didn't rattle. It didn't jerk. It turned like the person on the other side expected it to open. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. I was trapped. When the doorknob stopped turning, everything went quiet for a moment. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the front door, waiting for it to move again. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried to slow my breathing, but it didn't help. Then the knock came. This time it was loud, sharp, deliberate. The door shook as someone leaned into it. Not enough to break it, but enough to test it. I backed away, my feet sliding slightly on the floor. I didn't want to run yet. I didn't want to make noise unless I had to. The door handle moved again. Faster now. More force behind it. I ran. I moved down the hallway and into the bedroom, shutting the door behind me and locking it. The lock clicked into place just as something hit the front door hard. I heard would crack. The sound echoed through the cabin. Footsteps rushed inside. Not cautious anymore. Heavy and fast. I heard drawers being pulled open. Cabinets slammed. The man was moving through the living room, searching. I backed into the bathroom and locked that door too. I turned off the light and crouched in the corner beside the tub. My phone screen glowed in my hand as I tried calling 911 again. Still no signal. The footsteps came closer. They stopped outside the bedroom door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the bedroom door handle rattled.
Once. Twice.
The door shook as someone pulled on it. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The handle stopped moving. I thought maybe he had given up. Then I heard him laugh. Quiet.
Short.
Like he found something funny. The bedroom door opened. I don't know how he got it unlocked. I just know the door swung inward and his shadow filled the room. I could see his boots on the floor through the crack under the bathroom door. He walked slowly.
No ruse.
The bathroom handle turned. I braced myself against the door. My arms shook as I pushed back with all my weight. The handle twisted again, harder this time. The door bowed inward slightly. That's when I noticed the small bathroom window above the tub. I didn't think. I climbed into the tub and forced the window open. Cold rain hit my face. I pushed myself halfway through, scraping my arms on the frame. The door slammed open behind me. I felt hands grab my jacket as I fell forward. The fabric tore. I hit the ground outside hard, knocking the air out of me. I got up and ran. I didn't look back. I ran into the woods, branches cutting my face, mud pulling at my feet. I ran until the cabin light disappeared behind the trees. I kept running because I could still hear footsteps behind me. I ran until the trees thinned and I reached the dirt road. My legs burned. My lungs felt like they would explode, and my clothes were soaked from rain and mud. I didn't stop. A car passed slowly, headlights cutting through the darkness. I waved my arms and shouted until the driver rolled the window down. They called the police immediately. When officers arrived, I led them back to the cabin. It looked calm now, quiet in the rain, almost ordinary. But I knew what had happened. The front door was broken. The mud around it was churned and deep, showing signs of someone hiding outside for hours. They asked me to wait in their cruiser while they searched inside. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely grip the seat. I wanted to look, but I knew I couldn't. Minutes later, The officers returned with a man in handcuffs. He was silent. His clothes were wet and muddy, and his face was pale, almost blank. He didn't struggle. I asked if he had a weapon. They said yes. A large knife had been found in the crawlspace, along with blankets and food wrappers. Then they told me something that made my stomach drop. He had been living in the cabin before I arrived. Months, maybe longer. Nobody knew because he never left the woods in daylight. He had been observing visitors, learning their habits, waiting for the right moment. I hadn't even noticed at first, but the noises I thought were rain or branches. They were him, moving around, testing the space. He had known I was coming. The police said he didn't explain why he did it, who he was, or why he chose that cabin. All they knew was that he had been caught before causing serious harm. Once decades ago, another isolated cabin, another victim who got lucky and escaped. I realized then that the nights I had spent inside, hearing him outside, feeling the footsteps, the knocks, the breathing, all of it had been calculated. Every moment I thought was just the rain or the wind had been him, waiting, watching, studying me. The most terrifying part? The officers told me the crawlspace where he lived was hidden under the back of the cabin, covered by old boards and leaves. From inside, I never would have noticed it. He could have been there the entire time, just feet from me unseen. I had escaped by luck, not by foresight. The man was taken away that night, but the police never revealed his full history. They wouldn't confirm how many cabins he had been in, how long he had watched, or if he was truly alone. For the first time, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to admit during those terrifying hours. I was never safe inside that cabin. Not really. And I might never know just how close he had been. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear a faint creak in my apartment or the sound of footsteps on the stairs. My rational mind tells me it's nothing. But part of me wonders if he's still out there, watching cabins, waiting for someone to arrive. Because now I know he plans, and I barely escaped. Weeks passed after the incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't truly ended. I went back to work, resumed my routine, and tried to convince myself that what happened was a freak accident. But quiet nights became unbearable. Every creak, every gust of wind, every car passing slowly by my apartment made me tense. I kept thinking about the cabin, the shadows, the footsteps, the slow, deliberate movements outside my door. The police told me the man had been taken to a secure facility, and they assured me he couldn't hurt anyone else for the time being. They never gave me his name or background. They said some information was confidential, but I had the unsettling sense that even they didn't know the full story. How long had he been living there? How many cabins? How many people?
It was impossible to know.
I started avoiding isolated places entirely. No more weekend cabins. No trips into the woods. Even when I drove past rural roads, my pulse would spike. I imagined shadows moving behind trees. Imagined someone following the car, just out of sight. Rationally, I knew I wasn't in danger anymore. But rationality didn't stop my fear. One night, I was checking the mail when I noticed footprints in the grass near my apartment. They weren't mine, and the rain had just stopped. The prints led from the edge of the property to the sidewalk, but didn't continue further. My stomach dropped. I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, and called the police. They said they would patrol the area, but there were no signs of anyone when they arrived. It was a minor thing, I know. Probably someone else walking in the rain. But it reminded me too much of that first night in the cabin. Someone close. Watching. Waiting. Just like before. I still dream about the cabin. Not the part where I ran, but the part one never saw. The crawl space, the dark corners where he might have been hiding. I imagine him sitting there, silent, knowing I was just a few feet away. Calculating. Patient. I sometimes wonder if he ever got out of the facility. If he has returned to the woods. If he's waiting for someone else now. I try to tell myself it's impossible, that the police have him contained. But a part of me knows he planned for this possibility too. He always does. Some nights, I hear a creak in the apartment above me, or a floorboard in the hallway. My pulse rises. I tell myself it's nothing, but I think back to that first night in the cabin and realize something. It only takes one person, one moment of carelessness for it to start again. I still don't know who he really is. I don't know how many times he's done this, or if he's still out there, watching. And the thought that someone like him exists, patient and precise, is a weight I carry every time I'm alone. The case was never fully solved. And sometimes, when I'm in the dark, I swear I can hear footsteps outside my door. Maybe he's still out there. Maybe he never left. And maybe, if I'm not careful, I'll see him again. After the police report was finalized, life was supposed to go back to normal. That's what everyone told me. I moved out of my apartment a month later, not because anything else happened, but because I couldn't stand the silence anymore. Silence reminded me too much of the cabin. It reminded me of waiting, of listening. I asked the police one last time if the man had said anything after his arrest. They told me he hadn't. He refused to answer questions. He wouldn't confirm how long he had lived in the crawlspace or how many times he had done this before. One officer admitted something quietly before leaving the room. He's patient. That's what worries us. That sentence stayed with me. I tried therapy. I tried keeping lights on at night. I tried noise machines so I wouldn't focus on small sounds. None of it worked for long. My brain had learned something it couldn't unlearn. That danger doesn't announce itself. It waits. About 6 months later, I received an email from the cabin rental website. It was an automated message asking me to leave a review for my stay. The cabin had been listed again, renovated, new locks, new photos. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the people who would go there next. Couples.
Solo travelers.
Someone looking for quiet just like me. Someone who would hear strange noises and explain them away. Someone who would assume they were alone. I almost wrote back. Almost warned them. But what would I say? That someone might be watching? A year passed. Then another. The case faded from public memory. I stopped hearing from the police entirely. I don't know if the man is still locked up. I don't know if he was ever formally charged with anything beyond trespassing and intent. I don't know if he ever talked. Sometimes, late at night, I replay small details in my head. Things I ignored at the time. The way the cabin felt lived in. The way the curtain was already moved. The footsteps that started before I even unpacked. What scares me the most is this thought. If I hadn't heard the breathing that night, if I hadn't checked the door handle, if I had gone to sleep early, I would have never known he was there. And that means something worse than what happened could have happened. Something final. Even now, when I stay somewhere unfamiliar, I check under beds. I listen to walls. I watch reflections in windows. I trust my instincts more than logic, because I learned something in that cabin. Some people don't break in. They don't rush. They don't make mistakes. They wait. And the worst part is knowing that somewhere, right now, someone else might be standing in a quiet place, telling themselves everything is fine. Just like I did, right before it started.